Hello, welcome back to How to Learn a Language. This is another interview episode in the series, and this time I am speaking with Álvaro of Natural Languages. Now, I was interviewed by Álvaro back at the end of 2024, so you can head over to his YouTube channel to watch that, to hear that conversation. We had a really nice chat, and after I said, okay, I need to return this favor. Let's do this the other way around. I want to hear your experience of learning a language and how you do it. And a lot of our early experience of learning solo was around comprehensible input and like really kind of learning that and discovering that and then applying it as he then learned Polish in Poland. But something that I love about this conversation is how honest he is about changing his mind on how to learn languages and realizing that that isn't necessarily the only way. And it's something that we don't often get to hear. A lot of the time, we hear these perspectives on how we learn languages from one side or the other. And it's very rare that we get to hear someone who has changed their mind on actually there being a bit of a multitude of ways that we learn and ways that we need to apply. And we also talk about talking out loud, solo speaking habit. You've heard me say these words endless times. So it was great as well to hear Alvaro talk about that on his own terms and what that looks like for him as well. So I think you're really going to enjoy this one. I'm going to leave you to it and hand over to the interview now. And yeah, enjoy. Hello, Alvaro. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Lindsay. No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, excellent. We spoke recently, at the time of recording, very recently,
Hmm.
and your episode went live very quickly. For me, I think by the time people hear this, it will be a lot further in the future. But yeah, I do want to start by just pointing out that if people haven't heard yet, there is an episode of you interviewing me over on your YouTube channel for your podcast. So definitely I will pop that in the link for that, pop that link in the description rather, get the words in the right order. But yeah, today I want to talk about you and your approach to language learning because last time when we spoke on your YouTube channel was very, we talked a lot about me and things that I've experienced and my approach. And so I want to hear your side of the story as well and what it's been like for you. So yeah, fill me in on your kind of first language encounters and like,
Okay.
you know, where you came from, what languages
Hmm.
were around you when you grew up, all of that. Let's start at the very beginning of the story.
Perfect. Like episode one.
Episode one.
Perfect. So I'm a native Spanish speaker, right? And from Spain. So I had English in like school, like primary school, high school, like throughout the whole education system. And that was around 15 years of English, and I could pass pretty much any grammar exam, but I just couldn't speak the language. Sound
Was it
familiar,
just
right?
English in school for you?
It was mostly English, a bit of French,
Mm.
but I mean, the my point is, it was all taught the traditional way, like a lot of grammar, exercises, and so on. So, like I said, mostly English, but a bit of French. And I have to say that my mom, she's now retired, but she used to be a French teacher, and she has friends in France. So we used to go there every summer for a week or so. But
Mhm.
I was just recently recalling that experience, and I remember just learning here, I mean, like things here and there because there were no kids around me at that time. So I was with adults all the time. So I learned like, did you sleep well? Yeah. How you doing? Things like that. But
And
I didn't really,
adults that
yeah,
presumably are speaking in French,
exactly. Yeah.
like, yeah.
So I got things, but it wasn't comprehensible for me, right? But I mean, I'd say that like my first encounter was with English, like I said, and again, I could pass exams by like studying and so on, but I just couldn't speak the language. Like I vividly remember that, and it wasn't until I mean I didn't realize at the time, but when I was 1920 or so, I started watching the NBA, like American basketball in English. And I did it because I loved it, you know. I sort of had the hope that it was going to help me out, but it was mainly because I liked it, right? And after a few years doing so, I moved to Poland for the first time on an Erasmus university program. Like for non-Europeans, it's just a program to study for a year abroad in another European country, right? So I came to Poland, and obviously Polish spoken here, but classes were
Can
in
I pause you
English.
there?
Yep,
Did you pick Poland? Was it given to you?
good question. I mean, I'm from a small town in Spain, so a small
Mm.
university as well. So I had a couple of Dutch cities to choose from. This one in Poland, and a couple more in France, but that was in French, and I didn't speak French at the time. I mean, not good enough to be able to
And you'd
understand.
been, right? For the camping, it was boring compared to somewhere new, I guess.
Yeah. But I mean, my point is that I had those choices in the Netherlands and this one in Poland, and I remember I had to list them in order. And then depending on how many people requested it, I was given Poland. Let's put it that way.
Mm, mm. A
And
semi-choice.
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And like I said, classes were in English. I had a lot of international friends. English was the language we used to communicate. I'm just trying to imagine if that was in Polish. My goodness. And so that was the first time I had to use English or a foreign language, English in this case, like all the time. And I remember actually being able to communicate as opposed to other of my Spanish friends, for example, who had the same kind of experience I had in school, but didn't have the MBA part that I talked about.
Mm,
And I didn't realize at the time, but like a couple of years later, you know, I always felt like I had a passion for languages, but because we all relate language learning with the school experience, it just wasn't fun at all. And to be honest, it wasn't working either, right? So I don't know. It's just like later I realized that I love them, but I started like researching a lot on how languages are actually acquired and things like that. And I came across Stephen Krashen and comprehensible input theories. And that was a game changer for me because I started to understand why it works with English with me afterwards,
mm,
right? What it didn't work in school. And so that was the moment actually. So I quit my job. I started working on my project of teaching languages, I mean, teaching Spanish online, YouTube channel and everything. And yeah, and then from then I started learning other languages in the same way, like based on comprehensible input, just listening and reading I mean, resources that I could understand. That's the main idea, right? Like if you understand what you're listening to or reading, you're learning the language. We'll get into the second part of that later because recently I've been putting more emphasis on the speaking part
mm,
because I believe that's missing a little bit in comprehensible input theories and so on. But that was a great like a breakthrough for me because I understood how the language mechanism works, if you will, and I started relearning French, Italian, Portuguese, because those were a little easier for me because I'm a native Spanish
mm,
speaker and they're related. So I started from scratch, not with French, but Italian, Portuguese. I started from scratch, but not really because I'm a native Spanish speaker. You know what I mean? Like if you start from scratch with a language like Mandarin, you need someone to specifically create content for you or a teacher, things like that, right? But with Italian, Portuguese, I could start watching cartoons, simple things like that, and understand, right? So that's a bit of the my language learning story in general. We can get to the specifics in a moment if you want. Like
I
what I
do
do.
want.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, so let me get this straight. So English, a bit of French early on exposure, but not
Mm-hmm.
really learning. Then Polish, only when you
Yep.
moved to Poland, correct?
Good.
And then after that, would you say after the Polish, when it was like, oh, I can do this thing on my own, it doesn't have to
Mm.
be like school. Is that kind of realization of then thinking, oh, let me try French again, some Italian, some
Mm-hmm.
Portuguese.
Good
Yeah.
question. I forgot about that little part because when I moved to Poland, like I said, my first year that university program, everything was in English. So I just learned like a few words in
Mm.
Polish, like how to order a beer, the
Mm.
curse words, most important stuff. And but it wasn't until then I came back to Poland again. So I came back to Spain to finish my studies and then back to Poland. Then I had traditional course in Polish. And that was the moment I started to realize that there's something not working here because again, it was like traditional way, like grammar exercises, memorizing things like that. But for a native Spanish speaker with English, French, you can kind of get away with it because they're similar or a lot of words you can understand, things like that. With
Mm.
Polish, which is a completely different language, I mean, still European, right? But when you compare it with
Slavic,
Spanish
not
and
romance. Yeah, of
exactly,
course.
exactly, like different grammar points, cases, masculine, feminine, neutral, things like
Mm.
that I started to realize, like, wait a moment, because we were learning those things like consciously, like any traditional course, right? So I started thinking like, okay, so if I'm walking down the street, I want to talk to someone, and I need to think, okay, so this specific word has this specific function in this sentence, so I need to use this case. If the word is masculine, feminine, or neutral, I need to change the ending. So I was like, what? But by the time I come out with the right answer, the other person is gone.
A bit of a baptism of fire going from Romance languages and English, to be fair, to
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
Polish. I remember German for me was my first introduction to cases, and it was
Mm.
like, what? Excuse me, what? I do not comprehend what you are trying. I just didn't get it. And it
Yep.
took another student who thankfully lived local. Everything, like we said in your episode, everything I did was distance learning part-time. But thankfully someone was local and we met up once and I said, I just don't get this case thing. And she explained it to me in plain English, not in textbook grammar jargon. And I was like, okay, I see. But then, four cases, yes, masculine, feminine, neuter. But then Polish, there's a lot more to deal with, right? Than just four. It's
They've
like,
got seven, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
oh, that's really going in.
Yeah. I mean, so that was the moment I realized that I wasn't going to learn that language the traditional way
Hmm.
because it's just so, like I said, so different, so much new information to take in. And but the main point was what I just told you that there's no way I can think of the right answer in real time.
Mhm.
So this can be the way. So that's what got me into researching a little more, right? Because with Polish, it's difficult for me to say what helped me. I mean, now I know, but at that point, I started learning Polish with those classes. Then, so that I mean, I
I
said
guess,
that was the. Mhm.
sorry, I guess in the beginning, you were there for a year, right? And you thought it would just be a year
Yeah,
on the Erasmus. So that
yeah, and it
changes
was
your
it was a
perspective as
year. Yeah.
well. And that changes the way you approach a language. If you're thinking this, I'm going to live here for like nine
Uh-huh.
years,
Right.
you're going to approach it differently to if you're thinking, "No, it's just a year."
Of course. Yeah, of
Hmm.
course. I mean, actually, I was gonna be there for a year, like you said, and I didn't actually try to learn the language that year because
Hmm.
everything was in English, like university classes, conversations with international friends, even with local people, just like little markets, things like that. You just learn the basics, and that's all you need.
So what made you go back?
So I mean, I love the experience, first of all, the country and everything. So after I came back to Spain, finished my studies, I came back to Poland with a scholarship for like an internship. So it was actually a scholarship from my um, hometown. What's it called? Like city hall. So it was a scholarship for like a 4 month internship at a company here. And the first 3 weeks before starting the internship was an intensive Polish course. Remember that? It was like 60 hours in 3 weeks. Yeah, so it was it was 4 hours a day. Yeah, Monday to Friday. Exactly. 60
How
hours.
was that?
I mean, actually, I remember that I came here with three more people, three girls from my city. So it was the four of us. And I had a little background in Polish because of my year, right? For them, it was starting from scratch, completely scratch. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I could understand more than they could, but I mean, we did some cool things like watching things, but mostly it was, like I said, grammar and things like that. So, I mean, that was intense, like I said.
Hmm.
But that was the experience that made me realize that this can be the way to learn languages. Like what we're all used to, like learning grammar consciously, grammar exercises, memorizing words, and things like that. Right?
So after those 60 hours, how did you feel? How much did you feel that you knew?
Good question. So again, I don't like that approach. I don't think it's
Hmm.
really helpful, but I'm not saying that it's completely useless. So you do learn things, right? But I would start using what I learned, but it was pretty simple. Like things like, "Hi, how you doing? I'm from Spain. I'm learning Polish, but my Polish not good." Like the moment the conversation would would
Go off
start to be a little,
script.
yeah, a little exactly, and a little more
Like,
complicated.
what?
I'd be lost. Yeah.
I have a question for you then. Do
Hmm.
you think that that 60 hours, could you have learned what you came out of that with in less time?
Yeah, probably.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I'm trying to remember that experience.
Because the way you're describing it, like, hi, how are you? I'm from Spain. That is very much, lesson one, lesson two of
Hmm.
most courses, right? I feel like you can do that kind of stuff without 60 hours. Like, was it 60 hours of like, here's some new Polish, here's some new information to remember, cram, cram, cram? Or was it like,
Yeah.
we're going to revise, we're going to go over this, we're going to practice again?
It was a bit of everything, but it was, yeah, they were trying to like put some more polish into it all the time, like new. But
Mm,
I mean, the main thing for me is that the fact that you're learning new things doesn't mean that you're gonna be able to use them, to apply them, right? That's
right.
that's one of the breakthroughs for me. Like, we can talk about many things, but I remember being able to say that because now that I'm thinking about it, we probably practice that at the beginning. So, they would teach us like, different tenses and grammar points. But probably, I'm trying to remember because that was like 10 years ago, 11.
Mm,
So probably we practice how to say that, how to actually say that. Like, I'm from Spain, I'm learning Polish, things like that. So that's
mm,
stuck a little more.
mm.
But adding language or grammar points on top of the previous one, I was in contact with it, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna be able to use it.
Right. Every time you add a new layer, you started by practicing the first layer, the second layer, the third layer. So by the time you get to the new layer, like this stuff is solid because you've done it a million times.
Hmm.
But the newer stuff just doesn't get as much practice. I think that's really
Right.
common. Yeah. And also a lot of those early words are the things that you use the most. If you're being, if a course is good, you are going to use things like hello and thank you all of the time. So they are going to be
Hmm.
solid a lot quicker. But
Right.
yeah, I know I can really identify with what you're saying of like you think, okay, I'm going to add something new now, but you start with practicing the old stuff again, it's funny.
Right. Yeah, and then it's so you're putting like grammar rules or whatever it is on top like that's the new language you're getting exposed to, but that doesn't mean that's the way we acquire the language. It's a bit
Mm,
of a artificial way to learn it, if you ask me. Like what I mean is, I don't know, everyone's favorite um tense in Spanish, for example, or in Romance languages is subjunctive, right? Things like that. So
favorite.
favorite, quote
Yeah.
unquote. So it's because it's difficult for most people to learn that. They try to consciously learn it, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to apply it. That's like I said, that's one of the breakthroughs for me. Like learning a specific parts of the language doesn't mean that then you're going to be able to use them, right?
Mm,
So what comprehensible input theories taught me is that, like I said, we learn language by listening and reading. We'll get to the second part later. We'll get to the output part, I mean, because I've changed my mind in that sense. Um, but if you don't listen to the language and read the language, um, like comprehensible resources, of course, and you because you need to understand it, otherwise it's just noise, right? If you don't do that, it's like the language not getting in your head to use simple words, right? Like you can learn the rules consciously, but the language is not in your head yet. So I mean, you can memorize things and repeat them like a parrot, but the moment you deviate from like those topics that I talked about, I'm lost because I
mm,
haven't heard the expressions that I want to use yet. So how am I gonna come up with them? And I feel like I could do that with Italian and Portuguese because the structure is pretty similar, even worse. So I could use a little bit of Portuñol there or things like that. I can get away with it, but when the language is different, it's like I don't know how to say it. Even if I've been in contact with the rules, language is not in my head. So I can't come up with that, or I need, like I said, 5 minutes to think about it,
mm.
and that'd be awkward in a conversation, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. You're in this social exchange. You
Yeah.
would hope that people would help you out if you look stuck,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, not everyone is is choosing to assign themselves that role of helper or
Exactly.
teacher, you know. I'm
Exactly.
wondering how long after, or maybe during the 60-hour intensive Polish, did you think, you know what, this isn't quite working for me? I need to do some research. I need to find something else.
Uh-huh. So, first of all, before I answer the question, I wanted to say that what I just said, have you realized, for example, when people speaking a foreign language, a lot of people have that sort of hesitant style with a lot of pauses, like um, that's they're trying to access that conscious knowledge, but the language is not in their head
Mm,
yet, so they need to think about what they want to say, right? So that's what it leads to. No, I just wanted to
mm,
point that out. But so it wasn't. I'm trying to remember the experience. I don't think it happened at that moment, right? So I started to how to put it into words. So during those 60 hours, I started to think about it like, this is gonna be tough this way, right?
Mm.
But then it took me like a couple extra years to start getting into research mode. Right? It wasn't that like I did it right away. Like,
Interesting.
oh, yeah.
So what happened in those years? How was your Polish? Did it improve? Were you learning in other ways?
So I did improve a little bit. Like I said, it's not like it's completely useless. No,
Mm.
I don't want to say that, but it's just not not the best way, in my opinion. But so I started using it in those situations that I just talked about.
Mm.
Then I had a Polish girlfriend. We
Mm.
communicated in English, but with her family, they didn't speak English, so a little, I was exposed to the language. It wasn't easy at the beginning, but that was real exposure to the language. And in those situations, they do adjust a little bit because like the first time they don't. And when they realize that some of your answers don't make sense, because sometimes you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But sometimes the question doesn't require a yes as an answer. So you're like, okay. So, in their heads, they're like, okay, he didn't get it. So they started to adjust. So that was I was in contact with the language in real situations, uh, and that was helping me a little bit, you know. But the thing about Polish, for example, as opposed to learning Spanish in Spain or English in England or United States, just an example, is that in Spain, except for Madrid or Barcelona, if you don't speak Spanish, you're gonna have a hard time communicating.
Mm.
Here is different. Like you don't really need to speak Polish. In fact, I know a lot of people who have been living here for quite a while and they don't speak, besides
Mm. Mm.
simple stuff like I said, you don't really need it. If you know how to, buy things, supermarket and basic things, you're good because especially young people, but most people can communicate in English to some extent. So you don't really need it. So, I was hoping to get better, but it was going slow. Sometimes I felt like, oh, I'm never gonna learn this language because it was so different. It was just little by little. I wanted to learn the language, but I knew it was gonna take me a long time. But it was actually like my last year of being in an office job that I hated it so much that I actually, when I had some free time, I started to realize that I was looking for ways to learn languages.
Mm.
So that was like a hint for me, like, maybe
Wait,
you're interested in languages.
you say languages, so not necessarily Polish.
Yeah,
It was
like
like a wide curiosity.
yeah, like language theory, like understanding how to learn languages,
Mm, mm, mm,
right? Because so Polish was the experience, right? Like the real experience, but I feel like I could enjoy that. And I'm trying to remember what I felt, but it didn't happen overnight. It's like a long process, but it was a combination of hating my job and realizing that whenever I had some free time, I was like researching like how do you learn languages? What's the best way to learn languages? And I remember watching a ton of YouTube videos,
mm.
and
And
it wasn't
everything
like I said,
conflicts.
oh, I
Once
mean,
you really go down that online rabbit hole of it, like, oh,
yeah, you've got people telling you that you can start speaking from week one, like hacks and tricks and things like that. Yeah, it's difficult to. So when you have no idea, when you've been exposed to one way of learning languages your whole life, which is
mm,
what most people, that's the way most people learn languages or try to learn languages, to be precise, right? Is that first of all, there's no alternative, right, in your mind. Then you start consuming content. And I remember watching some videos in which people talked about how to learn the language in a month, things like that. And that's so dangerous for me because Um, like, I mean, to me, that's impossible now, to learn a language in a month. I'm just using a month as an example, but in a really short time.
Yeah.
But it's dangerous because when you're trying to understand how it works, you're not really an expert, let's put it that way. When someone's telling you to do this and that, to learn a language in a month, then you go apply it and it's not working. It's not working because it's just impossible to learn a language in a month, not because there's something wrong with you. But you look at your failure and the fact that it's supposed to be working for them, like what's the variable? What's left there? What's the difference? It must be me, right? That's why a lot of people think that they're not taught different languages, that it's never gonna work for them. And I understand it. It's how it makes you feel. So
Yeah.
that's why I am super passionate about languages, but I'm kind of obsessed with understanding how it works and communicating it in a real way, like being real about, oh, it's gonna take you years, not months.
Mm,
First of all, and
mm.
things like that. Just yeah, like I said, being real about it, like honest. So yeah.
I'm just, you've articulated that so well. I talk about this a lot in terms of, I mean, YouTube and the internet really is very much an extension. And in some ways, I really like that you use the word dangerous. I think that's quite appropriate. In some ways, more dangerous than what we might think of. I always talk about it in terms of the cover of a course book, using words like quick and easy and simple,
Mm,
complete. No insert thing you hate from school here, right? No textbook, no grammar.
mm-hmm,
That's a big
mm-hmm,
one. No grammar. Like,
mm-hmm,
and that has the same effect when you then think, oh, well, the book says this is everything I need. This is complete. The book says this is quick and easy. The book says,
mm-hmm.
I don't need any grammar. Well, okay, well, let's go. Oh, it didn't work. Oh, I'm the variable. I must be the problem.
Yep.
And it really sucks. Like,
It does.
because there is no one method, there is no one system or way or
Mm-hmm,
like hack, whatever you want to call it, that works across the board for everyone. The only thing that works is exactly what you're saying, learning how to learn for yourself so
mm-hmm,
that and you can apply like, oh, well, actually, hang on, let's be quite like neutral about this and not judge myself in the sense of that worked for that person, but I know the type
mm-hmm,
of person I am, the type of learner I am, how much time I have, whatever the variable, I know that that's not going to work for me. No guilt, no shame. I can move
mm-hmm.
on with my life. You know?
Yep. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
did you avoid getting stuck in that place? Because I think that is a place that a lot of people get stuck in.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm like the combination of realizing that I really wanted to understand it and that I hated my job. Maybe, I mean, like just persevere a little longer. I don't know how to explain it. So I came across Stephen Krashen's theories, comprehensible input, and I think this part is very important because I do believe in overall principles that are going to help, but when I came across his theories, I actually, like I said, quit my job, started my project. But before I started it, I went to a couple of workshops in France, actually, where so there's an American teacher who lives in France, and she started a workshop, a conference for language teachers from all over the world who understand language teaching this way. Like I said, comprehensible input. So listening and reading is the most important. Yeah, one is comprehensible, like I said. So that helped me understand how to teach the language, Spanish in this case, right? But any language in general. And I think this is important because when when I started that process, because that was such a breakthrough for me, it was like, oh, now I understand how it works. I was like all in on comprehensive input, like all input, both for myself as a language student and my students. So to give you an example with Italian, in my case, I started watching cartoons, like I said, because thanks to the similarities between Spanish and Italian, I could understand them. I started watching cartoons, then harder cartoons or cartoons for older kids, like documentaries. So I was like building my way up that way. Then I actually like this is normally not the case if you're learning a foreign language, but because Italian and Spanish are so similar, after 3, 4 months, I could understand series in Italian, but not original series. What I would do is watch American series dubbed into Italian,
It's easier,
which is
right? The
little
language is
tip.
easier. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Like little tip if you're learning another language like French, Italian, like I did, instead of watching original series, original movies, which I understand the desire to do so, but it's not comprehensible at the beginning. So what I did was, and you can do this on Netflix and like change the audio and things like that. American movies dubbed into Italian, in this case. So what I did is listen to the language for a long time without even attempting to communicate. So all input, right? And because I could understand more and more, and the language was starting to get in my head, I was like, oh, this is working. I'm going to do it with Portuguese. I'm going to do it with French.
That was my
And
question because I was thinking, what made comprehensible input stick for you as a concept rather than everything else that you'd seen on YouTube that felt like in a month, that's not for me or whatever. Like,
mhm.
was it the fact that it was working? It felt like it was working.
First of all, it made me think of my journey with English. So that was the
Mm,
moment I started thinking, so it was the MBA actually, because I watched it for years without
mm,
attempting to communicate because I was just listening.
mm.
It was pure input. So it was like, oh, so that was it, right? And then with Italian, I mean, once again, it was faster than with other languages because of the similarities. But 4 months in, I could understand series in Italian. I was like, whoa, Portuguese, French. And I even started, I mean, not started, but I started applying it to Polish. I started reading comic books and things like that. So one, it was working from the understanding point of view, from the input point of view. Two, I really enjoyed the process, which is also a change. Because, I remember not enjoying grammar classes in school. So that was another um, pointer, another thing that told me that, okay, this is working. Because I was learning those languages while enjoying every single minute of it. Because I was just watching videos and reading comic books, like and things like that. And but recently, this comes the second part that I told you about before. I realized because the theory tells you that by getting comprehensible input, one day you're gonna be able to actually communicate. And
Magic.
right, right. So, but recently I realized that it's not really, it's not that easy. Let's put it that way, right? But I want to be clear that I do believe comprehensible input is key in the process, and you need that, but it's not enough. That's what I've realized recently, right? Like doing that is going to get the language in your head. It's going to start the process of being able to communicate because the language in your head, but you do need practice. That's the part I was missing. Like, to be honest, as
Mm,
a teacher and a student myself.
mm,
Because again, Italian, Portuguese, even French, you can sort of fool yourself a little bit, just like I did with English before, because of the similarities. But with Polish, because with Polish, after all the years and applying comprehensible input to it, I got to a point where I could understand a lot of things. Like right now, I can understand like native. Yeah, I can understand 90. I'm making it up, but 95, 96% of Polish. Like I understand native podcasts. That's not the issue. The issue is communicating. and and I started learning German 3 years ago, and same thing. I've gotten to a point in which I can understand so much. And I started from scratch. I started with YouTube channels, from teachers, content creators who use comprehensible input principles to teach the language, like creating
Mm.
stories, but in a way that is comprehensible, like using gestures, drawing, things like that. So I've gotten my German to a point in which, again, I can understand native podcasts, not all of them, like, but I can understand a lot. I was
Mm.
in Berlin in June. I couldn't understand native speakers, but I realized that like our ability to understand is always going to be ahead of our ability to communicate. That's normal, but the gap was like too large.
Mm. Mm.
Polish and German specifically, because
Mhm.
like I say, Italian, French, Portuguese, and everything. I didn't communicate at that level at all, but I can communicate fairly well. But Polish and German, like I said, the gap was just too large because my understanding is really high, but the speaking is not there. Or it's not that it's not there at all. Like I can in Polish, I can communicate, but I feel the frustration of not being able to say what I want to say a lot of times.
How does that mismatch of skill, ability affect your confidence in saying, I'm fluent in Polish. I can speak Polish. Do you like the word fluent? Do you use it?
So I like where I'm at because again, if I go back to 10 years ago, like wow, like this is a language I thought I was never gonna learn.
And how do you refer back to that point? Is it just pure memory? Do you have any kind of records?
You mean of the okay, so not with Polish. You mean like if I've um documented the journey in terms of
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or is it
so
just you feel it?
right. So not with Polish because like I said, with Polish I started before I got into when I came across comprehensible input, started my projects and so on. So it's really hard to tell because just like English, because I did that intensive course that I told you about. I had real life experiences, so it's really hard to measure it. But with Italian and German now, I did like documenting, like, okay, so I'm watching an hour video, write it down. Like the time is taking me, right? And so to give you an example with German, I've been listening to German for around 12, 1,300 hours. Like I said, like YouTube videos, reading, and so on. And like I said, this is my ability to understand, but this is my
Mhm.
ability to communicate, right? And yeah, I was going to say something that I'm sure most people can relate to is that after, I don't know, 600, 700 hours of listening to German, it's like the language was starting to get in my head. So I would start to build sentences in my head or imagine conversations in the language. But the way you picture them in your head, and then when you actually try to say those things out loud, wow, that's so different. I mean, like in your head, it sounds perfect. Like, oh, I know this. I got this. Then you try to say it out loud. It's like, wow. Actually, I remember the first time I tried to speak German, like it was so difficult to pronounce for me. Like all those sounds. Like in my head, it was clear, right? But then
Mm.
I said,
Mm.
I was like, wow, like nicht echt. Oh, wow. So, little things like that got me thinking to like, maybe practice necessary, you know?
Mm. It's the physicality of it. It's the feel of a language in your mouth. Like you talked a bit about Portuguese. Portuguese, even though it is not my strongest language in terms of
hmm
how much I understand, how many words I know, etc., etc. But I love to speak it because it feels nice. Do you know what
hmm
I mean? Like
I mean, it's my favorite language. So
it's
yeah.
so weird. It's so weird. I can't describe it other than that. But equally, I've found there have been some languages that almost don't fit in my mouth
Mm-hmm.
because I have, and it all comes down, it's not to say they never would or could, it's because I've
Mm-hmm.
not had the practice. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, what do things look like now for you with
Mm-hmm.
accepting that, yes, maybe it isn't a case of one or the other, input versus output, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually a combination of everything. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of comprehensible input, I presume there's still stuff happening, you're still listening, you're still reading stuff. How did you incorporate more of that practice and the
Mm-hmm.
speaking and writing, if that is a part of it for you as well?
Perfect. Yeah, so before I answer the question, what you said that you haven't practiced it yet, and also, the nature of certain languages and your own native language, you're gonna have like I don't know, for example, those sounds in French, they don't come natural. I don't know, but
Mm.
Italian is not a problem when it comes to pronunciation, for example, for me. So
For you,
it's gonna change.
I can't roll my R's in Spanish, but
Things like that, for
it doesn't mean I
example.
can't speak Spanish,
Exactly, exactly. So, depending on your native language, the languages you're learning, like
Mm.
again, Polish, for example, there's a lot of difficult things about that language, but I don't think pronunciation is one of them. Or there's some things that are hard to pronounce, but it's a lot like Spanish in the sense of this is the way it's pronounced every time. It's not like
Mhm.
English or French that sometimes you don't know how to pronounce things because you have a rule in your head, but then there's a word that breaks that rule. You know, I know like the with English that when you have like two O's in a row, like spoon, floor, things like that, but then you have blood. Things like that, right? So like
Mhm.
in Spanish, you read it the way you say it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So with Polish, there's some things that are pronounced differently, but they're pronounced that different way every time, right? But anyway, but practice, like you said, yeah. So after I realized that I was missing the practice part, what I'm doing now with German is practicing out loud to myself.
Mm.
So I've been listening to the language for quite a while, like I said, and I feel like the language in my head. But again, imagining conversations in my head is very different to from actually using the language, right? And it's not just pronunciation that we were talking about, but also being able to recall those things, right? And let alone if that's a conversation with a real human, that there's more pressure. But so a few months ago, I started talking to myself, like about mm, I don't know, like for example, I'm listening to a podcast, so summarizing what I just listened to, or talking about what I'm doing, or talking about what I like, or sometimes, I'm cooking, so it's okay, so I'm gonna grab the onions, chop them, things like that,
Mhm.
in the language, out
Mhm.
loud. And I actually thought it was gonna be weird, but first of all, I've realized that it really helps me with pronunciation that we talked about, because you're actually using the language for the first time. Then I'm really enjoying it because because I've been listening to the language for quite a long time. Language is there, so I'm quite capable of using the language when I'm doing that myself because there's no pressure. That's another added value, right? Like there's not anyone judging you, or so you're by yourself entirely. So if there's something I don't know how to say, I just think of another way of saying it. There's no pressure.
Mm.
But there's something about like realizing that you can actually use the language, that the process is working, right? It's encouraging because I'm like I said, oh, I'm gonna go grab the onion. So it's like I'm narrating my life, and I do it for a few minutes a day, especially at the beginning, because you're starting with that process, so it takes a lot of like mental toll, if you will,
Yeah.
and it's taxing mentally, right?
Yeah.
But it's really it's I mean it's been I've enjoyed it a lot, and it's really satisfying is the word. Yeah, because you realize that you can actually use the language, right? So things like that, and I'm thinking about when to start communicating with actual humans, like not just talking to myself out loud, but because obviously that's the next step. That's one of the problems is if you go from just input to the real world, it's it
Mm,
is too much of a transition, right?
mm,
Because you go from comfortably sitting on your couch and listening to the language to having to use it with natives or non-natives, but in real time where you don't have time to think about it,
mm,
with the pressure of feeling judged. That's in our head most of the time, but yeah. But it's higher pressure situation than just talking to yourself. So I feel like it's a nice stepping stone when it comes to bridging the gap between just input and the real world, you know,
mm.
because it starts the
Absolutely.
process of of output in a comfortable situation, right?
Yeah. Solo speaking habit. I think we spoke about this
We
in the
did.
episode on your show.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, it is. It's a thing that is so often ignored because we are almost in a rush to get to
Mm,
that finish line of being able to just speak with people that
mm,
we don't,
mm.
it's almost like we don't want to put in the work or we don't think we have to. We think maybe we can get away without doing it, you know?
Yep,
We can just
yep.
go out and speak and it'll be fine. And it might be fine, but it could be better.
hmm
You know?
Yeah, and then there are personal differences as well. Like there's people that don't
Yes.
care and they just start speaking to other people and I mean, probably they do care to some extent, but not as much as other people.
Mm,
What I mean is some people just say whatever they can say and they don't care or
mm,
they don't care as much about being wrong or not using it right or things like that. Whereas
mm.
others, and I would include myself in the second group, are more conscious about that. And so going straight to the real world might be a bit of a shocking experience.
Mm,
So, like I said, I feel like this is a really nice stepping stone. But since this is the first year or the first time that I'm using these ideas, I'll keep talking about it the moment I start communicating with real humans in German, because that's the experiment I'm doing. Because there's another thing about English is when I came across comprehensible input theories and I reflected back on my journey learning through watching the NBA. So that was the most important thing. But because I was so, I don't know, real, I was so into this theory, it's almost as you like you want to fit your experience into this theory to see that
mhm,
that it works, right?
mhm,
So what I mean is in my head, that was the only thing. Like I was listening to English like for a couple of hours every day, so that helped me. And it did, don't get me wrong. But I forgot, and I remember recently that after a couple of years of doing that, in the few opportunities that I got to use English in my hometown, because I'm from a small town in Spain, so not a lot of chances. I remember that there was a Nigerian guy in my city that I would come across like at night in several clubs when partying. I would start talking to him, and we would talk for a while. And obviously, then there's the combination of having drank a little bit of alcohol, so that's you're not worried about mistakes. That's another topic.
mhm,
But recently, I remember that I was actually using the language before I moved to Poland for the first time, because in my mind, my first year in Poland was the first time I had to use the language. So
mm,
I went from just listening in my head, from just listening to being able to use the language. But I forgot those in between experiences with this guy and
mm,
obviously my first year in Poland, I could use the language, I mean, I could communicate in English, but there was still a lot of room for improvement.
Mm,
So using it got me better as well, right? So
absolutely.
it's like the input part was the foundation, right? But then using it, it's what builds the entire building. If that makes sense.
It makes like complete sense. I really get it. And I'm thinking
Yeah.
as well, I know when I spoke to you, I said that for me, Spanish started with Shakira, but it's only on
Hmm.
reflection in recent years when I've realized, well, actually, there was a lot that happened before Shakira, like mostly in terms of music, right? Like I have this
Hmm.
playlist of songs. I'm like, it's called Probably Why I Learn Languages. And it's stuff like Macarena. It's stuff
Opa.
like right, right. It's like Living La Vida Loca. The
Mm,
Spice Girls, they have that song, Spice Up Your Life, where it's all like all these little odd, like they're mostly just names of dances, where it's
okay.
like
Mm,
flamenco, lambada,
okay.
and all
Okay.
of, and it's like, oh, all of these little
Yeah.
sprinklings that happened, and you kind of forget about it. You don't think of it as
Hmm.
significant until you see years later, looking back and see the full
Yeah.
picture, like probably how you found with the Nigerian guy in your town
Hmm.
of like
Hmm.
you didn't think anything of it until
Yeah.
that was a start point.
Yeah,
Nice.
sometimes it's hard to know what's actually helping, especially with, in your case with Spanish, or in my case with English, especially with English, because we're surrounded by it. So we're getting exposed to the language and you don't really know this is helping me or not. It's that's why I'm documenting my journey with German, because it's easier for me to know what's working because that's my only exposure to German. I live in Poland,
Mm,
so I'm not
mm, mm.
with English,
You
you're
can't
listening to
count
English song.
everything
Yeah,
with Polish if you're living there. With English, true as well. You can't count everything because English is just, I
everywhere. Yeah.
think, I mean, I can't speak from personal experience, but I think different to learning any other language as a foreign language. English is
Yeah,
just has a different global presence. Um,
exactly. But yeah, even
mm,
Spanish for you, like you said, now Spanish music or Spanish speaking music is really
so much
popular.
easier to, yeah, yeah,
So you might
definitely.
you might be listening to a lot of songs and you're not thinking about, oh, this is helping me. But later, like 2 years later,
Yeah.
in hindsight, it's like, oh, okay, right.
You're like, oh, I just recited that whole song word for word. Wait a minute, that's in
Yeah,
another language.
yeah,
I did a thing. Absolutely.
exactly. But yeah, with Polish for me, like I'm exposed to it the whole time, but especially at the beginning, the language was around me all the time, but it was nice at the beginning, so it wasn't
Mm,
really helping me, or just a little bit. So it's hard to measure how much it's helping you.
mm,
All right,
definitely, definitely. Do you have any final words before we wrap up?
wrap it up.
Anything we haven't mentioned that you're like, we need to talk about this. This is really key.
Hmm. So I mean, like I said, I feel like there's some principles that can be helpful to most people. Like what I talked about, like comprehensible input. Like yeah, for me, it's hard to imagine learning the language without it.
Mm,
Like just consciously learning the language, grammar, and things like that, and trying to use it.
mm,
But I've even changed my mind a little bit when it comes to grammar, a little bit of it, like consciously studying it, right? Because again, I used to be like pretty radical, like no grammar at all. And
it's those YouTube videos. They radicalized
yeah,
you.
yeah. And I still don't use it myself because I just don't enjoy it at all.
Hmm.
So I'd rather watch videos for longer, even if it
Hmm.
takes me longer, because I enjoy that way more than studying it. But I'm okay if people want to learn specific things consciously or grammar points. I'm okay if that's not the focus point of your language journey, right? But I'd say enjoying the process is just key to me, like because you can be the most motivated person on earth, but if you're not enjoying the process, sooner or later you're gonna end up giving up. I mean, at least that
Absolutely.
was my experience because I'm from a person who's really passionate about languages. I felt like giving up so many times.
Yeah, I get it.
Even now,
Definitely.
to be honest.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Just take a little break, take a breather, and you'll re-find that kindle of motivation.
Yeah, but when you feel like you're not getting anywhere, or not that you're not getting anywhere, that's not the right word, but that you're not
You're
improving
walking
as
on a
much as you'd like
treadmill.
to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you feel like, what the hell am I doing here? Just kidding.
Mm.
But because learning the language this way, makes me enjoy it, I'm like,
Mhm.
okay. So I look into what I can do better, but this is helping, even if not as much as I'd like to at times.
Mm.
But because I'm enjoying it, I'm willing to keep doing it because I like it. Like in German, now that I can understand native podcasts, it's pretty much what I would be doing in my own native language. So, it's
That's
enjoyable.
awesome. Alvaro, I want to thank you for being so honest and for being brave enough, essentially, to admit, you know what, I've changed my mind on some things. Like that,
Uh-huh.
I think is really huge and it's very difficult for us to do. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your story across various different languages and different experience with them all.
Hmm.
Where can people listening or watching find out more about you?
So, well, my pleasure. First of all, it was nice to be interviewed because I'm usually on the other side, so it's like, nice.
Right, that's why I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd say, you can go to my YouTube channel, Natural Languages, where actually I started posting stories and conversations to teach Spanish through comprehensible input,
Mhm.
yeah, on my channel. But then I realized that, um, how to put it into words, like helping people understand how the language process works, it's really what most people need. So I started a podcast interviewing people, trying to, understand it myself, like, how the language process
Mm.
works. So yeah, that's on my channel, natural languages. And recently I started Natural Spanish, which is the channel in which I just share like stories, games, things like that to learn Spanish in a in a more relaxed way through comprehensible
Excellent.
input. And yeah, so that's recent, but I'd say Natural Languages is the main channel. No.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And I will pop those links in the description of this episode. So do go and have a look at that. And yeah, Álvaro, thank you for joining me. And I'm sure we'll speak again very soon.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure, like I said.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.